Good morning, students. Happy Monday. So we are starting today with page 46 in our math book, and we are going to learn how to change decimals into fractions. So, of course, as after you complete your review exercises and speed drills, you will move on to practicing this, and the directions say decimals can easily be changed to mixed numerals and fractions. Remember that the whole number is always to the left of the decimal point. So, this is the most important thing to remember at first, that the number to the left of the decimal, so no matter how large the number is, this number to the left is always going to be that whole number, that large number that goes next to the fraction. If there is no number before the decimal, then the fraction won't have a whole number, if you notice. So here for 2.6, we remember that 6 is in the tens place, just like we see here, right after the decimal. So we would have the 2 as the whole number, and then 6 over 10, because this is 6/10 in the 10th place. And it's going to get a little bit easier to understand as we move on and keep practicing. So here, we do not have any numbers before the decimal, so there won't be a whole number. We just have to determine what number and what place comes after the decimal here. So we have 0.21, and we know that we always find the last number and then determine what place it's in. So here for 21, we have the 1 in the hundredths place because it's 2 numbers past the decimal. 1, 2, hundredths. So we would just have 21 over 100 without a whole number. Here we have a whole number to the left of the decimal. So we would have our whole number by itself. We have just a 7, but the 7 is in the hundredths place, 2 numbers after the decimal. So we would have 3, this one first, and then 7 over 100. And then just to go over one that's in the thousandths place, even though they're not as common, we have our whole number, which is to the left of the decimal. So of course we're going to have that whole number over here to the left. And then we have 12. But 12 where? Well, we have the tens place, the hundredths place, the thousandths place. So we would have 12 over 1,000. Always make sure that you're looking at what place the last number is using this little chart here. Just count the points after the decimal. It's as easy as that. So let's go on and do the first 2 samples. Here we have 3.2. So first we determine, is there a number before the decimal? Yes. So we'll have 3 as our large whole number. Then we have our decimal, and then we have 2. Well, in what place is 2 in? We know that the place right after the decimal is the tens place. So all we have to do is put 2 over 10. So our answer would be 3 and 2/10. Another way to think about it, which we will go over later on, is if you were to put a dollar sign in front of it, it would be $3 and then 20 cents. So that is another way to look at it, to remind you that the whole number needs to come before, because here would we have 3 whole dollars and then the cents come after the decimal. But that's a trick that we will go over a little bit more later on. Here for our second sample, we have 5.003, or 5 and 3 thousandths. Why? Because 3 is in the thousandths place. 1, 2, 3 thousandths. So we would have our whole number 5 and then 3 over 1,000. Let's do one more from your original problems, just to be extra sure. Here we have 5.6, or 5 and 6/10 right after the decimal. So we would have our whole number 5 and then 6 over what? In the tenths place, so 10. So that's what you're going to continue to do from 2 through 10 today. And here for our language arts assignment for Monday, what we're doing is we're going over page 77, which was your assignment for Friday actually, but we need to review this before we go on to our written work on page 78. So what we learned on Friday and read was how subjects and verbs must agree. So I'm going to just go over a little bit of these concepts, and we're going to have to go back and forth to complete our work, especially the rest of this week. So here it says you already know that nouns, pronouns, and verbs can show number. That is, they can be singular or plural, and we've been doing that for quite a while. We know whether it's talking about one or more than one. But subjects and verbs must agree. If the subject is singular, then the verb must be singular. So here's a little example here. My cat, talking about one cat, purrs when I pet her. Another singular example. She is a Persian cat. So notice how if they're talking about just one, she, then that means the verb also has to be talking about just one. And we're going to see the opposite here. If the subject is plural or more than one, the verb must be plural. So here we're talking about my cat only, but here we're talking about more than one, my cats. And this has to be plural too. My cats purr when I pet them. Notice how when you're talking about just one cat, it says purrs. When you're talking about more than one cat, it says purr. So pretty much it's just reminding you that based on whether your subject is singular or plural, it's going to affect whether your verb is singular or plural. Here's another example of plural. They are Persian cats. So here we have she, and because it's talking about one, the verb is. If they say they, more than one, we don't say they is. We say they are. And my suggestion is that as you're doing these exercises, you read the sentences out loud, because you can notice when you're speaking them out whether or not they make sense or if you should make an adjustment. Now that may not always be true, but it can be. So definitely read your sentences out loud to help you. And here are just a few examples of singular versus plural and some contractions. Remember that contractions are two words that are put together to make one word with an apostrophe. So you're going to need to use this page as we go on through the week. So definitely pay attention. Definitely go back, take your time. So here we have some examples using the pronoun he, which just is talking about one he. And we would say he is, he does, he was, he has, he goes. These all make sense. But if you're talking about more than one person and you use the word they, then all of these verbs change. As an example, we would not say they is, or they does, they was, they has, they goes. No, we have to adjust our verb to also make it agree, make it go with the plural pronoun. So we wouldn't say they is, we would say they are, they do, they were, they have, they go. So just making sure that you notice that difference between singular and plural and how your verbs have to adjust. Now here for contractions, these are also the same when you're talking about singular. So I'm going to make it a little easier by using also the words he and they, just like they do up here. So contractions isn't, doesn't, wasn't, and hasn't are singular. For example, you would say he isn't, he doesn't, he wasn't, he hasn't. But if you're talking about more than one person, you would say they aren't, they don't, they weren't, they haven't. You would not say they isn't, they doesn't. Notice the difference. You have to adjust your verb to go with the correct pronoun. The pronouns I usually takes the plural form of the verb. The pronoun you always takes the plural form of the verb. So all that means is if you're writing a sentence or you're talking and you're using the pronoun I because you're talking about yourself, you would use the singular verbs. You would say, you would use the plural form, not singular. If you're using the pronoun I, right here, oftentimes, not always. The pronoun you always takes the plural form. So if you say you would always say you are, you do, you were, you have, you go. So you is always plural. But although you can say I have, I go, I were, I do, you don't often say I are, or you don't. So not always for the I, but when you're talking about somebody else and you're saying you do use the plural form all the time. So as we go on to page 78 today, we might have to go back and remind ourselves of which verbs go with the singular and which go with the plural. So here, for page 78, which is our written work for the day, we have our heading says, do they agree? So it's pretty much just working out everything that we've learned. And it says, identify these pronouns as singular or plural. So you can use page 77 as a reference, but in this case, you're not adding any verbs. You're just identifying them as singular or plural. So is he a singular pronoun or a plural pronoun? Is ours a singular or plural? So just remember one or more than one. If it's one, you put an S for singular. If it's more than one, you put a P for plural. So after you've done these practice ones up here, you're going to do the same thing with the contractions. And as you probably remember, we have a list of contractions on page 77 over here that will help remind you, if you don't already know, which ones are singular and which ones are plural. And another trick is to just add a pronoun. If you add a singular pronoun and it doesn't make sense, read it out loud. See if a plural pronoun makes sense, and then you can decide whether or not they are singular or plural. So would you say he don't or they don't? They don't make sense. They don't agree. So because they agree, you would put P for plural. Over here, just as a practice, we have isn't. If we don't know right away whether isn't is singular or plural, we can add a pronoun. Let's add a singular pronoun, he, because it's the one we've been using. He isn't. That makes sense to me, but let's try plural just in case. They isn't? No. So isn't is a singular contraction. So you're going to continue on with similar exercises, deciding whether the subjects should take a singular or plural verb. So just remember, if there's more than one in the subject, it needs a plural verb. And if it's only talking about one noun, one person, place, or thing, then you're going to put S for singular. Down here for write D, you may have to write a few sentences. Remember that if you write small, you may use your book. If you want to use an extra piece of paper, you may do so neatly. For remember E, we're going back to our previous unit, and you're just going to write the plural form of these singular nouns. So for every word, you're just writing the plural next to it. Okay, so here for our spelling assignment for Monday, of course, we have our brand new list. This time we are on list 15, so make sure that you are practicing list 15 on Spelling City. And today, after I read you all of the pattern words and content words and vocabulary words, we're going to focus on our pattern words because they are actually homographs, which are words that are spelled alike, actually spelled exactly alike, but have different meanings. So before, we had words that sound the same, but now we have words that are spelled the same, and they don't quite sound exactly the same. They may be pronounced differently. So I'm actually going to read you the pattern words in both ways, and then we're going to identify those pronunciations and write the homographs under the pronunciations that they give us. So for our pattern words, first, I'm going to read you both pronunciations. So here we have the word invalid or invalid, spelled exactly the same. Now my suggestion before I move on is to complete your definitions before you complete your list work. Your definitions are Friday's assignments, but if you do them first, you may be able to use that information to your benefit this week as you complete your exercises deciding which meaning goes with the word. So we have invalid, invalid. There are two meanings in the back of the book that you should be writing down. Wound or wound. Excuse, excuse. Record, record. Conflict, conflict. Console, console. Conduct, conduct. Address, address. Produce, produce. Complex, complex. Increase, increase. Contract, contract. Notice how they are kind of similar in pronunciation, but not quite. So that's why it's very important to pay attention to the slight differences in the ways these words sound. For our content words, before we move on to our pattern word exercise, here are the pronunciations. Rotation, surface, periodic, strength, proximity, continuous, gravitational. Vocabulary, transportable, transporting, envision, invisible. As usual, before we go on to our vocabulary work, I always suggest you look these up in your spelling dictionary. My best advice is to look up all of these words in your spelling dictionary, write down both meanings for each of these words, and have them ready. So as you're doing your weekly work, you can just take a peek at your definitions. You won't have to go back and forth to your spelling dictionary. So, for your pattern word exercise, You're going to use the 12 words, writing the homograph under the pronunciations. Now, most of the time you'll be able to tell which word it is because they look so similar. Sometimes they can be a little tricky to figure out. So you're going to use the pronunciation tricks. So here we have console, console. Over here, notice the pronunciation looks quite different, but just based on the way it sounds, you know that it is this word, console or console. So you would write that here. Here for number 2, we have wound. Notice the long O sounds, double O, or wound. The second word in our pattern word list looks just like it. So just use those clues based on how they sound and how they look to complete your pattern word exercise. And of course, using your clues from your content words to complete your exercise as usual.